Alright guys, so we're starting up with our novel study on To Kill a Mockingbird. So we want to set up the introduction and some of the background, the context about the social and cultural context that it was written into, the time period that it's set, and other details about the genre and so forth. So I'm going to try this program with this tablet, and hopefully this will work to make some notes here. So as we remember, as I usually drew, we have the author, and of course the text, and then us, the audience. So in this case, we're reading a historical novel written in the 1960s. So we have a novel, 1961, by Harper Lee. So this book was a Pulitzer Prize winning book, which is a big deal. That's like the biggest award that you can win for writing a novel. And Harper Lee didn't like getting famous, didn't like the fact that she was getting a lot of attention from the public, and so she actually only ever wrote one book in her whole life, which was a huge worldwide bestseller and big award winner, and it was very important at the time period that it was written in the 1960s in the United States. Okay, so what was going on in terms of the author's cultural context and background in the US? So at the time, in the 1960s, what was going on in the US was the civil rights movement. So, what was the civil rights movement all about? It was about equal rights for Black people, for African Americans, such as voting and schooling, education, and of course there was the issue of segregation. Segregation means to separate Black and white people in all aspects of the society. So you couldn't go on the same part of the bus as white people if you were Black. You couldn't use the same washroom. You couldn't go to the same restaurants and clubs and movie theaters and so on. Everything was separated. Okay, so segregation, the laws that were in place, not sure what happened there. The laws that were in place for that were called Jim Crow laws. And these were in the southern United States. So, under the system in the US, every state could have some of their own laws and so forth, how they governed each state. Well, in the southern states, the Jim Crow laws were the laws that separated everyone, and you'll have a video to watch on the lesson page on Schoology that will give you a lot more historical context about Jim Crow laws and how that affected blacks and whites and the way that they lived together. But this was an issue in the southern USA, and what you have is a North versus South in the US states, because that goes back to the original context of the conflict between blacks and whites, which had to do with slavery, colonialism, and that issue between the North versus the South over slavery actually caused a massive war in the United States, which was the Civil War. Okay, civil meaning between two groups in the same country. During the Civil War, part of the cause just before the Civil War was the Emancipation Declaration, which was issued by Abraham Lincoln, the famous president. Okay, you can see a picture of him here. So here's Lincoln, famous U.S. president. Here he is in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and he's got this famous beard style. So he had declared the Emancipation Declaration. Emancipation means to set free. So the Emancipation Declaration was basically the cause, one of the causes of the Civil War, causing a big explosion to happen in the U.S. amongst their own people. So directly connected to the context of Jim Crow laws and the time that Harper Lee is writing To Kill a Mockingbird in the 1960s, the background to that is slavery and colonialism and blacks being taken from islands and from Africa and from other places from their native countries and being brought to the U.S. as slave labor. Okay, now, why is this such a big issue? Why did the southern states, why did these guys fight so hard that hundreds of thousands of people died in a war in order to keep slavery? Okay, so the North said no to slavery. The South said yes, we want to keep slavery. So why? Why did the South want to keep slavery? Well, and sorry, this writing's really messy. I'm trying to learn how to use this tablet thing, and it's not as easy as it looks. I guess I need an iPad. So what was in it for the South? Well, it had to do with the economic industries in the South that relied on slave labor. All right. Well, what were some of the industries? There was the cotton industry. So lots of money in cotton. Tobacco industry was also. So they would work, the slaves would work in what were called plantations. and they would work the fields and live on the property of the plantations, which were usually had big colonial houses and so on. And they would buy these slaves, and then the slaves would have families, and they wouldn't have to pay for the children to be their slaves. So you buy one slave and you get more slaves for free. Basically, you just have to feed them. Okay, so we're talking huge amounts of savings for labor. Labor is almost free, and so vast amounts of wealth are generated because of this slavery industry. Okay, you can take a look at example of cotton farming. Here you can see slaves working together in the cotton field and gathering up cotton and so forth. Okay, so fabrics, textiles, other industries that were providing lots of raw material to the people in the U.S. Okay, so the immediate context that Harper Lee is writing in is 1961 civil rights movement, but the story is going to be set in the 1930s during the Great Depression. Okay, so normally if we were together in class, I would have you guys break into groups and do a little bit of background research about the Great Depression, about slavery and the civil rights movement and the Civil War. Okay, this writing's really messy, I'm sorry. I have to learn how to use this tablet better. Okay, so Harper Lee sets the text in the 1930s during a time of economic downturn, but she's writing the novel set in the 1930s in order to comment on her time period and to give a perspective about racism and how to handle racism. Okay, so racism and prejudice, bias, those are all issues that Harper Lee is going to deal with. And who are we learning from in this text? Well, we have a child narrator. Scout is her nickname. Wow. All right. Okay, I've got about a minute left in this video, so let's talk a little bit about Scout. If I knew how to use this thing. Okay, so Scout is actually writing from the future as a grown-up person, but she's thinking back to when she was a child and her experiences when she was a child. So we're seeing through the eyes of a child, really, in many ways, but we have to see the language is actually very complex. So we get the adult language, but with a child's perspective. All right, that's all for this video, a little bit of the background. There will be more to come. Thanks.